Karina Huber is here in New York where the legal proceedings have been taking place. Karina, you are following the story all day, what's going on between the negotiations between Argentina, the holdouts, and this New York court. What is the latest? Where do things stand now?
Well, Michelle, it's really been a roller coaster ride. I mean, their expectations were running high that some kind of agreement would be made at the 11th hour because the consequences of not coming to an agreement are so dire. But in the end, there was no agreement made. They could not come to some kind of consensus agreement. So Standard & Poor's has downgraded Argentina's credit rating to selective default for not paying that interest payment on the restructured debt, so that $539 million on $13 billion of restructured debt. And the mediator in the case as well has said that default is imminent.
S&P saying Argentina's defaulted effectively. The mediator is saying so. Argentina has a different take on the matter.
They do, right. And we had the economics minister who is here in New York as part of these negotiations, Axel Kicillof, and he said that Argentina is not in default. And this echoes statements that were made by the Argentinian president Kirchner recently, that their argument is that essentially they made that payment of $539 million. They put it into Bank of New York Mellon to make that payment. But it is a judge here in New York that has really tied the hands of financial institutions. They are not allowed to pay out the existing bondholders, the ones who agreed to the restructured debt, until they pay the holdouts.
Argentina's economy minister Axel Kicillof arrived in New York this week in a last-minute attempt to avert Argentina's first sovereign bond default in 13 years. The negotiations are tense. For the first time, Argentina agreed to meet face-to-face with what it calls vulture funds, a group of hedge funds led by Elliott Management who have been holding out for full payment on Argentinian debt they bought years ago. The judge is forbidding payment to other holders of Argentinian debt, known as exchange bondholders, who agreed to a substantial reduction in the value of their bonds in 2005 and 2010 until the so-called holdouts get paid.
Even if they come to an agreement by midnight tonight, it's not clear that they have avoided a default, because if payment systems close and payment hasn't been made, there's a very good argument that default has happened.
Professor John Coffey at Columbia Law School says if Argentina goes into default, the impact could be substantial.
It will exclude both Argentina from international capital markets and probably some private Argentinian companies. And I'd have to say some economic slowdown looks like it's probable once a country defaults.
The case has lasted roughly a decade, and negotiations have been taking place in this courthouse in New York. That's because the original bonds were issued under New York law.
A decision that Argentina probably regrets. The judge in the case is playing hardball with Argentina, but critics say the South American nation is also playing tough with U.S. courts.
Ordinarily in a negotiation, you try to find a strategy that it's a win-win, that both sides can get something. I'm afraid the way things are going today, this looks like a lose-lose strategy.
Well, Argentina is in a tough spot. If it pays the holdouts, that could trigger a clause in the exchange bondholders' contracts that says they would have to be paid 100 cents on the dollar as well. Now, if the country doesn't pay the hedge funds and it defaults, as many say it has, it could face other legal challenges and costs. Michelle?
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. All right, thank you so much, Karina.